We're quickly approaching the end of the road for the 2024 NBA season, with the Celtics in strong command of the NBA Finals right now over the Dallas Mavericks, and all 28 other teams are currently at home thinking about what went wrong and how they can fix those things for next year. The playoffs provided so much clarity on a lot of murky situations, and they, without question, taught us a lot, which brings us to today's video. Now that the dust is starting to settle on all that has gone down, we will be going over the 5 biggest lessons learned from this year's postseason. These are the things that every basketball fan should be taking note of and monitoring going forward, because they're all correlated to possible changes on the horizon. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I'd also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. The first big lesson learned from the 2024 NBA playoffs is that the Boston Celtics actually managed to put together a near-perfect basketball team. Now, when I say this, it doesn't mean that they're the greatest team ever assembled or anything close to that, so don't take this the wrong way in that regard, but what I am saying is that in today's NBA, the Celtics managed to put together a group that checks off every box a contender needs without exposing themselves to any notable weaknesses. Today's era of basketball is more about offense than ever before, and the Celtics just broke the NBA record for the best offensive rating in the history of the league, putting up a ridiculous 122.2 points per 100 possessions. I'm also not breaking any crazy news to you guys when I say that the three-point shot is also more important than ever before, and the Celtics have achieved all of this success by forming a team that is not only stacked with all-star caliber talent, but also by getting players that talented that also shoot the lights out from three. The Celtics far and away shot the most threes per game this season, and they did it while making the second best percentage of their threes in the league. All 8 players in their playoff rotation right now are at minimum above average three-point shooters that can bury you if you leave them open, and 4 of the 8 players in that rotation in the playoffs shoot 40% or better from 3. Their stars are very good finishers at the basket, which forces defenses to respect their drives, and then they, arguably better than any other team, capitalize on those opportunities by finding the open shooter when the defense collapses. Jason Tatum has been having a pretty poor shooting performance in the finals, but it doesn't even matter because the Celtics have so much firepower around him, so even though many would have liked to see a closer series so far in this year's finals, the truth is that the Celtics were always a level above the pack. The next big lesson learned from this year's postseason is that the Big Three method does not work anymore. Throughout a lot of the 2010s era of NBA basketball, we saw a lot of teams obsess over forming a quote-unquote Big Three of all-star talent to lead their teams to the promised land, and at the time, the more star talent you had, the better the results your teams would typically find. However, with how different the financial landscape is in the NBA today, and the new rules under the CBA, teams are finding it a lot harder to both stack the deck with a dominant Big Three of talent and be able to balance out the rest of their roster with capable role players that fit their needs. It has very much become a one or the other deal now, and we saw a big example of it crash and burn in this year's playoffs through the Phoenix Suns. The Suns were in the NBA Finals in 2021, and despite making big splashes each of the last 2 seasons, they've somehow managed to get worse and worse. They traded for Kevin Durant last year but got eliminated by the eventual champion Denver Nuggets in the second round. They then traded for Bradley Beal to add to Durant and Devin Booker this year, giving them a trio of elite playmaking talent on paper, but having done so, it handcuffed them big time financially, and they ended up incredibly top-heavy with a lackluster supporting cast around them, and they got sent home by the much more well-rounded Minnesota Timberwolves in the first round this year by way of a sweep. Now they've gouged themselves of a lot of their valuable assets just to put together a core that have overlapping skill sets that don't complement each other, and no more money to spend to address the clear and obvious holes in their roster. So the lesson learned is that balance in a lineup is way more important than over-the-top star power, regardless of fit. The next big lesson learned from the playoffs this year is that the trade deadline is way more important than many fans give it credit for, and the moves made at the deadline can definitely make or break a season. The trade deadline is always a time when a lot of excitement starts to brew because there's potential for big names to be on the move, but at the same time, most teams sit back and let it go by because they're too nervous to make a panic move that could cost them down the line mid-season. This year, though, we saw two teams in similar spots when the trade deadline approached, and one of them got aggressive and retooled their roster, which has led to them now being in the NBA Finals, while the other team sat back and ignored their team's issues, which resulted in them landing in the play-in tournament, followed by a first-round exit. If you haven't guessed by now, I'm obviously talking about the contrast between the Dallas Mavericks and the Los Angeles Lakers. The Mavericks and Lakers were right next to each other in the standings on the day of the trade deadline, in 8th and 9th place in the Western Conference, but the Mavericks went out and added PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford to help improve their defense and give Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving some role players that actually complement their talents. It paid off in a huge way, and both of those players have been big parts of their run to the finals. The Lakers, on the other hand, had clear and obvious issues at the time, yet they sat back and did nothing, keeping their group together as is, and in doing so, they were sent home by the Nuggets in the first round, potentially ending LeBron James' tenure in LA on a sour note, as his future becomes very up in the air. The next big lesson learned from this year's postseason is that the next generation of NBA stars are officially ready to take over. We've been in an era of NBA basketball for a while now where the old guard have continually dominated. The era of LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, and others from that era seem to be finally passing the torch to the young guys, because this year, all 4 of the teams that made the conference finals were led by a young rising star. Luka Doncic has been a clear-cut superstar for a while, but leading his Mavericks team to the finals has finally pushed him over the hump to the absolute top tier. Anthony Edwards, at 22 years old, was the leading scorer of a Timberwolves team that relied on him to take all of the big shots and make the biggest plays. The Celtics may be incredibly strong top to bottom, but Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are both still in their mid-20s with long primes ahead of themselves, and even the Pacers, led by 24-year-old Tyrese Halliburton, surprised everybody with a deep run this year. Of course, all of those teams also had a good balance of veteran talent with players like Kyrie Irving, Jrue Holiday, Pascal Siakam, and Rudy Gobert all being vital to their team's success as well, but the fact is that the next generation is starting to do the work to lead teams at the highest level, and should inspire a lot of hope that the league will be continually strong moving forward, with the biggest names mentioned at the beginning of this topic eventually starting to retire soon. And finally, the last of the big lessons we learned from this year's postseason is that health, for better or worse, is ultimately the most important factor in finding success in the playoffs. At the end of the day, you could do everything right with the way you go about building your team, and while a level of regular season success is necessary to set yourself up for properly, seeding-wise, the only thing that really matters at the end of the day is if your team is at full strength or if it isn't. Injuries unfortunately play a role in how the playoffs shake out every single year. It's just the luck of the draw if your team's best player is going to be healthy or not to lead their teams to their goals. This year alone, we saw the following top players get injured, which undoubtedly hampered their group's chances of winning: Giannis Antetokounmpo, Damian Lillard, Kawhi Leonard, Joel Embiid, Jimmy Butler, Julius Randle, Jalen Brunson, OG Anunoby, Zion Williamson, and Donovan Mitchell, amongst a few others too. Teams like the Bucks put together their all-star duo specifically to give themselves a better chance at hanging with the other highly powered offenses in the playoffs, but their 2 best players both missed either half of or all of their playoff series, leading it to killing any chances of seeing a payoff. Injury luck is really hard to account for, but unfortunate truth is that it determines the outcome way more than we as fans would like it to. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you learned from watching the playoffs this year. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.